really wish we had enough seats for everybody. I didn't expect such a robust turnout. I'm glad you're all here tonight. We're going to recess the Acton Town Council meeting now and turn the proceedings over to the county to hold the GSA meeting.
There you go.
So, without further ado, Paul.
Thank you very much. I hope you all can hear me, and thank you all for coming tonight. I see that we're an overflow crowd tonight.
Yeah, we're watching.
The ropes are outside.
Well, first of all, I'd like to start off with welcoming a couple people.
Into the microphone.
Here with me tonight is Mitch Glazer from the Department of Regional Planning. I'm Paul Maselbas, Principal Engineer over the Waterworks Districts. Also like to welcome with us Donna Tremere tonight with Supervisor Varga's office. And Kirk Allen is my assistant. Also like to introduce Rich Gomez. He's our area engineer over the North Maintenance area. He covers the Acton area as well. Rich? Thank you very much. Okay. Many of you probably recall I was here in April, actually in another community center, but I gave a presentation along with a representative from the state, Brian Moniz, about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And I'll cover it briefly tonight, just for the folks who didn't happen to be here for the April meeting. Basically, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was enacted by the government, state government in 2014. And the idea is to ensure that groundwater is properly managed throughout the state. Now, in many areas of the state, groundwater basins are in severe trouble. They're overdrafted, and you've heard about settlement in Central California and many wells running dry in Central California. Fortunately, that's not the case here. When I came last, I talked a bit about what does it mean to this community, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and what does the state have in mind? And for those who were not here,
Turn up your volume.
Can you speak up a little?
Is there a volume control you can turn up, please?
I'll try to speak more into the mic. Is that helpful?
Yes.
All right, I'll try to keep close to my mouth. Okay, so this map before you shows the East Acton area of the Antelope Valley Groundwater Basin. In red is the Leona Valley area of the Antelope Valley Basin. As the Antelope Valley Basin adjudication process moved forward over the last 10 years, there was a determination made by scientists that this East Acton area and the Leona Valley area are not part of that Antelope Valley Basin. They've always been considered as such by the state. And the determination was made that they are not. So they were not part of the adjudication effort. So as a result of that, I'm sorry this map keeps shutting off. Apparently there's nothing I can do to keep it on. But as part of the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, they identified all of these areas that are parts of basins but not perhaps covered by the adjudication, and called them fringe basins, and identified those for management. Okay? So as the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act went forward, the state required that we take these fringe basins that were identified and manage them. The first step in the process was to form a groundwater sustainability agency, and I think I'm just going to leave this map off now, because everybody got the idea of where this area is. Now, as we moved forward with the formation of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, that's what I talked a lot the last time I was here in April. This Groundwater Sustainability Agency for this region was approved by the Board of Supervisors in May. Now, it took about 3 months for the state to officially recognize the GSA because they wanted to ensure that no other parties were stepping forward to also call themselves a GSA for this region. The only authorized parties to form a GSA are the the municipal water providers and the regional planning agency. And in this case, in Acton, also the Antelope Valley East Current Water Agency. The Waterworks District 37 and County Department of Regional Planning moved forward to form the GSA. We've been working closely with AVIC too. AVIC will be joining the GSA, it appears. Right now we're waiting to see the board's action with AVIC. I believe that they will be acting in the near future such that AVIC will also be a member of the GSA. Now, after the state finalized the formation of the GSA, we decided to have our first meeting here. What I'm going to talk about tonight is actually not too much different than what I talked about back in April. Our strategy for this region has been to have the state declare this area as a separate basin from the Antelope Valley Basin. Also, to have it designated as a low priority basin. As such, it would not be subject to the requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and no groundwater plan, a groundwater sustainability plan would have to be prepared. One thing I do want to get out there too immediately is that if a groundwater sustainability plan is required for this region, it would only be impacting those property owners who pump more than 2 acre-feet per year. And I understand that's a pretty small percentage of you folks. Now, an acre-foot is about 325,000 gallons of water, and it would basically serve a family of 4 for a year, 1 acre-foot. And so this 2 acre-foot limit, those that fall under 2 acre-feet are typically referred to as de minimis pumpers. It's the non-de minimis pumpers that would be affected by this effort. Now, tonight, as I started to say, that our strategy has been from the start that we'll ask the state to have this declared a separate basin from the Antelope Valley Basin, and also a low priority basin, such that it would be accepted from the requirements of SGMA. Tonight, we're having our first official meeting of the GSA. The 2 members of the GSA, the 2 board members, are myself and Mitch Blazer from Regional Planning. And so we've got a number of action items to go over, a number of resolutions to consider. So I'd like to talk about those, but I would like to take any public comments or public questions at this time. Sir?
I'd like to make a comment that once the boundary modifications are done, I see no purpose for this group, and would request that you, once reprioritized, that you dissolve the GSA.
That's something that we're certainly going to consider. Right now, it's probably a bit premature to consider dissolving the GSA. We're looking at asking AVIC, or actually AVIC is asking to join the GSA, and of course we're very happy to have them as part of the GSA. But it would be premature really at this juncture, sir, to make any kind of recommendation or statement that we'll be dissolving the GSA. We don't know exactly where this is going, but a few months from now, once the state has made a determination as to whether this will be a standalone basin of low priority, we'll be talking about that at that time. Sir?
So standalone basin of low priority, I understand you said 2 acre-feet per common family. What is it if it doesn't go there and it's the other worst case? What are those restrictions then?
In the event that the state did not declare it as a low priority basin, we had to continue with the effort of preparing a groundwater sustainability plan for the region. And that plan would basically look at all those folks that are pumping more than 2 acre-feet per year and assessing the ability of the basin to sustain providing water to all those parties. And so we would likely hire a consultant to prepare the groundwater sustainability plan, and we would develop a funding mechanism to pay for that.
Excuse me, is there any way to turn up the speaker? Everyone out here can't hear anything.
All right, I'm sorry about that. I'll try to be louder. I'm not quite certain how to operate this machine here, so I don't know how to but I will talk more into the
That's louder.
microphone. Is that better, sir? Yes. Okay, I'll keep this very close to my mouth. I hope I answered your questions sufficiently, sir.
Thank you.
Sir?
For public edification, could you please explain how Senate Bill 1168 and 1319 and Assembly Bill 1739 got us to this point? And the second part of my question, do you have any comments about the legality of how those were passed by the government?
Those three bills are the basis for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
Chair.
And I really don't have any comment about whether it were processed legally or not. I mean, this was a state action that we're subject to. I believe that the question may have been asked when Brian Moniz was here, who represents the Department of Water Resources, and he was here as well. And basically, this is just the state's first attempt at groundwater management and ensuring that basins are sustainable throughout the state. And as I mentioned, I think that there are other areas of the state that are much more in need than this one.
Have those bills in effect taken away our ownership rights to our groundwater as it is in 30 other states right now?
I don't believe that that is the intent, to take away the groundwater rights.
Yes.
I can say that I believe that the motives of the state are altruistic in that they believe that some basins do need to be managed. And I think some basins more than others, and that's why they came up with the high priority versus low priority designation.
So there's no language in those bills that gives our ownership expressly to the state?
No, not that I know of. Ma'am?
Isn't this a tax that you're going to import to the owners of wells per gallon of water pumped off their property as opposed to ownership?
In the event that the state would like us to proceed with a groundwater sustainability plan, that will be costly. It'll probably be a couple of $100,000 minimum to prepare that. And the funding will have to be generated from pumpers in the region.
But you didn't answer the question.
And that will be the,
That didn't answer the
That didn't
question.
answer the
sorry, could you
question.
repeat your question?
I didn't ask you how you were going to pay for it. What I asked you was, will we be paying taxes per gallon on water pumped out of our wells as opposed to asking for ownership of the well?
It's likely that the revenue generation for these activities I mentioned will be based upon the amount of water that you pump from the ground.
Is this already not being done in Tehachapi and Kirk County?
I'm not too sure about what's being done there. I know in Antelope Valley, through the adjudication effort, recently folks were told that they need to meter their wells, those folks who are non-de minimis pumpers, those that are more than 2 acre feet. Yes, ma'am?
So what are we going to get in exchange? We bought water rights and we bought mineral rights, and you're just going to take them away and charge us for them. What are we going to get in return?
The concept is a manageable basin, or a well-managed basin.
And what am I going to get for what you're taking away from me?
What you're trying to take away. Nothing.
Basically, if there is a problem, I don't believe that there's a problem in this basin in terms of the amount of water drafted from the basin versus what is returned every year through the rains. But the idea and the logic behind the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is to ensure that those folks that have been pumping water will be able to continue to do so, and that any new development coming in.
What am I going to get for it? What am I going to get?
My system that I
you're
paid
taking away
for,
from me?
and my system upkeep of costs
Right.
right now, you're gonna meter me and then charge me for my own system, is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
If it passes.
The idea would be that with the implementation of such a groundwater sustainability plan, it would guarantee that you folks could continue to draw water rather
And
than
pay for
other.
it. But we're not paying for it now, except the maintenance on our equipment. Why do we have to start paying for it now?
The funding that would be used to develop a plan that would help to ensure that
We
you
don't
folks
want the
could
plan.
continue.
We don't want the plan.
We want to know what you're going to take, what you're going to charge us.
Why we moved to Acton.
Okay, I'm the messenger of the state with respect to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We've been asked, District 37 has taken the lead role in taking on this Groundwater Sustainability Act and trying to do the best that we can to serve your community and advocate for your community. Really? Take a couple more questions, ma'am.
This is worth the price of admission.
Some of us have wells that no longer produce year-round, so we purchase water from other properties here in Acton that do. And so what are you going to do about those people that probably draw more than the minimum that you're talking about because they provide a service to their neighbors and other people living in this area for various times of the year? How is that going to affect?
There are a number of
residents.
haulers in the area. We, of course, recognize that, and I've talked to some of them. And our intent, of course, would be to allow those companies to continue to serve the region.
At what cost to them for pumping water? How many gallons? You're talking about 2 acre-feet per resident, and they've got probably right now 75% of the wells in Acton Aguadossi are dry or marginal, and they're supplying water to them. So at what amount are you going to let them run to supply us with water in demand? And at what cost to them?
In the event that the state required that a groundwater sustainability plan needs to be prepared, then we would address those questions as part of that study that would have to be conducted to prepare that plan, just to see what pumping is taking place in the basin, and then also how that water is being restored every year. Is the basin indeed in overdraft, is of course the bottom line of the study.
How are you going to do that
Ma'am,
without?
if I may, there's a couple other folks, this gentleman over here had raised his hand, I'll get back to you in a moment. Yes, sir?
I have a question. So how do you figure that 2 feet or whatever, your 2 acre feet? Do we have to put a meter on our well for you to be able to tell us that we're not using that much or we're using that much up front?
Good question, sir. The idea is that most folks would self-report how much water they're using if they are using over 2 acre feet. Those that are using more than 2 acre feet. Those that are
We all use 1 acre
If I may answer that. For those who are using well over 2 acre feet, it's readily determinable as to whether they are. You look at the land use, you look at how much power they're using. There's a number of factors that one looks at to see how much water is being used. Couple in the back, sir. You're the man. Go ahead, sir.
I just recently became aware of the situation through the newspaper that's out in Acton. Myself and my fiance, we rely on hauled water, so this issue is extremely important to us.
Yeah.
I just had a couple of basic questions, just to review the whole situation, okay? First of all, who specifically in the state will be dictating whether or not it's a high or low priority area?
Who do we talk to?
Yeah, who do we talk to? Who will be that group that makes that final decision?
So the Department of Water Resources will be the one reviewing our application that we plan to submit for the basin boundary adjustment.
Okay. Second question. So, given if it is declared a high priority area, the water haulers will still be able to pump the water, but at a higher cost, which then they'll be passing on as a given situation.
Yes, that's right.
And the third part of my question is, if this is to happen and weather patterns are to change and the water basin is to raise again, like I anticipate that it will in the future, will it be possible to reassess the area and make this whole situation more full? Or will this now be a permanent situation for the end of time?
The study that would be conducted would be looking at water restoration in this basin over probably at least a 10-year period. It won't be looking at anything short-term. And so I believe it would take into account that type of water return that's taking place.
So it's only for a short-term goal? Is it only a 10-year period?
I believe that they'll be looking at a 10-year period. In the event that a groundwater sustainability plan is prepared, it will be probably 10, even 15 years of water.
And then after that, it will have to be reassessed.
When I say 10 to 15 years in the past.
Oh,
that's the worst.
We're paying for that now.
Okay, thank you.
Is this a form of rationing? Is this rationing our water? Is that what this is all ultimately about?
No, ma'am. Let me get a couple of people in the back. Ma'am, with your hand raised in the back.
Yes, hi, Ann Trussell, resident and realtor. Question just for those of us that don't understand. First of all, it's my understanding that we're not really in a basin. We were not part of the adjudication. So my questions would be, one, to what regard does AVAC want to stake in this? Why do they want to sit at our table? Are they going to sell the water back to us? Because AVAC holds water, they're water holders, they sell water. And then the second thing is for those of us that don't understand, if you could please explain what a water master is and how that will affect us. And even though the state might be requiring this, this is going to set a precedence for us here in our area as far as our own water wells. And I think that's what a lot of us are concerned about as well. You talk about 2 acre feet, you're talking about farmers. So, but eventually this is going to trickle down to us.
Well, first, I'll address your question about AVIC. I think that the AVIC board is interested in joining the GSA as a service to this community. They do sell a lot of water to this community.
We've been giving them money on the bond issue.
Most of the water that's served to the residents. Most of the water served to the residents in Acton comes from surface water imported by AVIC. And so I believe that their motives of joining the GSA are actually to advocate for this community and to help the community. Oh yes, of the water master. Water masters are usually appointed as part of an adjudication effort for a basin. Now, in the event, we keep talking about in the event that we prepare a groundwater sustainability plan for this agency. It's highly unlikely that's ever going to occur in the near future. This is a very high likelihood that this basin will be declared low priority in a separate basin by the state. But in the event that it was not, and a groundwater sustainability plan must be prepared, at some point there could be a water master, and the role of that water master would be to monitor the groundwater usage and continually look at return flows to the basin to ensure that the basin never gets into an overdraft situation. For those folks who have been drawing water for all these years, that they can continue to do so, and that development coming in will be required to provide their own water sources rather than be taking in groundwater. Ma'am?
In the event, by just very simple terms, I know the gentleman brought up about the actual metering. Who's going to pay for that? How is it monitored? Do we have to give up right-of-way easements like we do Edison? They can freely come on our property, inspect it. What if it goes bad? Who's in charge of replacing it? All that kind of stuff. I know those are some details that might be in the distance, but still, those are issues. Are we giving up one more right? We've already given up minerals. Now we got to get out of water. Now we got to give up an easement.
I understand. I think, like you mentioned, this is quite a ways into the future to be talking about how that is actually going to take place. But I believe that in the event that meters are required, that there would be some self-reporting of water use by the water users, and probably some monitoring as well by the governmental agency in charge.
Who pays for the cost of putting those meters on?
That, of course, would be up to the property owner to pay for that.
But we don't want it.
We don't want it.
You say it could be, it could happen, it's not going to happen, it might happen.
I'm sorry, sir, could you start over?
Okay, in the event that this might happen, you keep saying might, maybe, whose recommendations are they going to take to either make it a basin or not? Is it yours? Is it somebody from the county?
It's actually based on a scientific study that was prepared.
Who did we talk to?
There was a consultant that was hired for the adjudication.
And who was that?
Who hired where?
Can we have a name? Is that a secret?
Yeah.
And you said, no, these people...
The United States Genetic Service survey was in charge, the USGS was in charge of reviewing those scientific studies that showed that this basin is indeed a separate basin from the adjudicated basin.
Okay, you said something where they said, who do we talk to? You gave us some names of people that aren't elected, or appointed. So who's elected that we can talk to?
Now, the DWR, the Department of Water Resources, is the agency that would be in charge of the
they're
determination.
appointed, they're not elected.
They're appointed. Who's the elected official?
They're a governmental agency. In terms of any elected official, well, at the state level, I'm not certain, but perhaps the local assembly. Good to know. Perhaps the local assemblyman or senator representing this region would be good contacts for elected folks, if that's helpful.
This lady's had her hand up.
Ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, I want to know who represents us in these planning meetings and deciding water managers and putting on these meters on our, who represents us? Who's our voice? You're their messenger. Who is ours that attend the meetings, who speak up for us?
Good question. Mitch and I are the directors of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for this region, and it appears as though AVIC will be joining us as well. Now,
But you want to put restrictions on it.
You're not elected. Are you government? You're their messenger, or you are messenger?
actually, we are your messenger advocating for you.
So
But
during these
we are responsible for ensuring that the state law is implemented as well.
But who represents our views, what we want, to give us equalization at that table when these decisions are made?
What we've decided to do is to form an advisory committee that any of you folks can join. That would be advisory committee to our board of the GSA.
I think we'll all join.
How do we get
And
notice
so,
of that?
Do you notify all of us by mail or somehow so that we know when you have these meetings?
we have a sign-in sheet tonight that puts your information down. We're preparing our list of interested parties. You'll also have the opportunity to indicate on that sign-in sheet if you'd like to be part of that advisory committee that I mentioned. And that would be your voicemail.
But we don't want an advisory committee. We want a seat on the board. That's what I represent. That's not an advisory.
Seat on the board, yes.
Okay.
With a vote.
Under state law, only certain parties are allowed to be part of the
Change the
board.
law.
I beg your pardon?
Change the law.
Good idea.
That's possible, and certainly you could contact your local assemblyman or senator in that regard.
This gentleman has had his hand up for a while.
Sir?
Yes. All I know about the AVIC Association is what's been said at this meeting, but it sounds to me like they supply water to the Acton area, and they presumably get compensated for that. And if they're on this board, they have the power to shut off the water, starve us, and sell us more. Isn't that a conflict of interest that they shouldn't be allowed to even do that?
I don't believe that's the case, sir. I think that their motives are
I don't care about their motives, it's a conflict of interest. They stand to profit by starving us of water, and they're on the board that's going to be deciding whether we're going to get starved. Yeah, I don't care if they're angels, it's a conflict of interest, you know, I'm a lawyer. There are a lot of things I can't do. My motives may be pure, but if there's a conflict of interest, I got to get out.
Thank you. Sir?
I apologize, I'm a bit of a noob here, but so if we have agriculture, we're using roughly 60 to 70 acre feet a year. What can we expect? And I have a second question on that. If I expand our reservoir and use stormwater to fill that reservoir, is that outside of the purview of, it's not groundwater, correct? Or
That's correct.
Okay.
Capturing stormwater would be dealt separately from the groundwater pump.
Charge more.
So,
Dealt separately.
do you have any type of idea of what we can expect, how it's going, I mean, since food's somewhat important as well, is there going to be some extra leeway for agriculture, for productive land?
Well, typically, what's been going on is that the pumpers would be charged based on the amount of water that they pump. It sounds like the amount of water you're pumping, it would be fairly nominal, a small amount. And so I don't expect that the cost would be terribly high. Initially, of course, the only cost that would be incurred would be for the groundwater sustainability plan. And given that District 37 is the large pumper in this region, District 37 would pick up the majority of the cost of such a plan. So again,
I'm sorry,
in the event that that's required.
just to be clear, so I said 60 to 70 acre feet, which is more than 30 times your threshold of 2 acre feet. And you still consider that to be a minimal amount?
Kirk, are you talking about
He doesn't really answer questions.
District 37 uses about 1,000 acre feet per year of well water.
Out of the pumps, out of the wells?
Yes.
How do you know that?
We have meters on our wells.
Who pays one?
Let's see if anyone has.
The gentleman over here.
Sir, I was looking to see if there's any else that I hadn't addressed yet.
Thank you.
Sir, go ahead.
All right, are you guys aware that the majority of this area is zoned agriculturally? And, you know, agricultural usage of water is basically, you know, expected here. Is that considered into your decisions? And the second part of my question would be, on a different note, at a certain point, if water haulers are not allowed to deliver water, the property values of those properties and land that may rely upon that once developed is greatly reduced. Is that something that's compartmentalized into the decision-making process?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we have the Department of Regional Planning as a planning agency as part of that GSA to recognize and consider those factors as we move forward.
And as far as the agricultural part also, that's...
Absolutely.
And what happens in such a case? What happens, let's say down the line, you decide, or it's decided through the proper channels that, you know, these water haulers cannot operate, and you know, a big part of our community depends on that. And you know, some people who have you know, homes or land, you know, or both, that they're greatly affected by that. For instance, if I have a piece of land in Acton that I was going to develop and it didn't meet the 3 gallons per minute current requirement to be allowed to build on, there is effort going on right now to allow those properties to be developed using hauled water. If hauled water goes away, you know, as many as 15,000 lots can be affected. So it's just a huge thing, you know, if that's taken away. And is that somehow taken into consideration, all those you know, nuances?
Well, a couple of points I'd like to make. One is that the hauled water that's used to serve the customers here in the Acton Basin, we would do everything we can to advocate for continued water pumping by those haulers to serve those customers within the basin. One thing we do take issue with is when the water is exported out of the basin and served to other areas. That's one thing I can see that could come to pass in the future, is that for customers outside of the basin area might be impacted in terms of water availability.
Because it's our water. That benefits us. I think this is a huge thing if it gets to a point where all water is affected and the property values will greatly be affected. So just, that's a very complicated issue that you guys can consider, please.
Thank you. Ma'am?
I have a couple of questions, actually, in response to what you just said. A little bit bothered by this idea, and we've spoken about this, the water going outside of Acton. And I've told you that this community has always taken the position that water should not leave this basin for purposes such as supporting, you know, dust control in the Antelope Valley or washing all the solar panels and things like that. However, District 37 itself just annexed an entire section of Agua Dulce, Casula's development. So you're already planning on taking water from this basin and sending it to the Agua Dulce area. So I'm not, first of all, I'm having a hard time reconciling that. And then I have 2 other questions if you want to respond to that.
Well, I don't have all the facts on that proposed development that you speak of with me, but I understand that they're being required to provide their own water source to serve their customers, which generally means, in terms of the amount of water that's used to serve Acton from AVEC, it's roughly 70% we're looking at of the water for this region comes from AVEC. And so any developers are certainly going to be required to obtain more water in that manner.
Okay, and I don't know if this is the public comment period, and then when you open the floor to each of your resolutions, you're going to have a comment again, or do you want to take comments on your resolutions now?
Actually, we'll read the resolutions, we'll take a motion to approve in a second, and then it'll be open for comment at that time for each resolution.
I'll hold on.
Okay, did anyone else want to? Sir?
Sorry, I just have 2 other questions. One, what kind of a period of time are we dealing with until this is resolved, whether it is a high or a low priority basin? So how much time does the community have?
We expect that the state will make a determination probably in mid-2018, sometime maybe August or September.
Okay, and this is a serious question. What would be the penalties for the community if we don't comply?
I don't think that that's an option. The state is requiring that we would have to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan if that came to pass. I'm not sure what the penalties would be if we chose not to do so, but I really don't see that as an option.
If you have to regulate your own well and self-report, why would anybody do that? I mean, you could just not comply, and what would there be taxes, would there be fees? And I mean it in a very literal sense.
You're right. There are some who are maybe pumping more than 2 acre feet per year, maybe 3 acre feet per year, and those folks would be hard to identify.
Okay.
However, most of your non-de minimis pumpers are folks, in other words, those that pump more than 2 acre feet per year, they're going to be large pumpers, pumping 10, 15, 20 acre feet per year, and those are fairly easy to identify based on the land use and power and other factors.
Is there a website we can view the entire California map for which basins are low and high priority?
I believe we have a link to that on our own website. If you go to lacwaterworks.org, there's a page there that's devoted to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and there are many links there that go to that site that you mentioned that shows the state and the groundwater basins affected.
Isn't it commonplace for situations like this for folks to be able to use their historical amount of usage, when these kinds of laws come into effect?
Absolutely.
Yeah, is that considered in the type of legislation that you're talking about?
It would be.
It would be.
And that is the intent of water is to ensure that those pumpers are able to continue pumping at the rate they have historically. Unless, of course, there's such an overdraft that there's simply not enough water even to supply those folks who were
right. But didn't you say that the scientific work has already been done to determine whether we're in an overdraft or not? Or are you saying that still has to happen?
No, not an overdraft, just that it is indeed a separate basin. That study that I referred to would be done in the future in the event required by the state. A man with the blue shirt in the back?
Yes, I read in the Country Journal where there's a chance that this will put all the water haulers out of business. And you're telling me that it's not. What's going on here? And then I have another question.
We have no intent of putting the local water haulers out of business, provided that they're serving the residents in this region in this particular basin.
Then why was it printed in the Country Journal that there was a chance that they would be put out of business?
I'm not sure the article that you're referring to, but I don't believe I had any input on
It was in
it.
this week's Country Journal.
They're having to pay for hydrology studies to keep their licenses.
My second part to the question, heaven forbid, if you put the water haulers out of business, who's going to deliver water to us, and where are you getting that water from? Is it well water? Is it city water?
We recognize your concerns that you're talking about, ma'am. We have no intention.
If you deliver city water to my house, you will kill the both of us. We can't tolerate it.
We have no intention whatsoever of making it so the local water haulers can't operate.
But you're making it where it's $60,000 to $100,000 to get the hydrogeology report that you're requiring us to get. And we can't afford it with $10. That's it, and it's due now.
Just a bit of brief background. There are 3 major water haulers in this region that have asked for a new CUP. Their old CUPs, conditional use permits, have expired. And so at this time, we've decided...
Simultaneously? At the same time?
No, the county's been
Interestingly
holding
enough, they're within a few years of each other, and the county has not made any effort to enforce the expiration of those CUPs and has allowed those 3 water haulers to continue in the absence of having a current
That's
CUP.
not true. That's not true. We put in our application, you keep sitting on it, and you don't give us any answers. And we call you to get, why can't we get our appointment to get our CUP renewed? Well, You gotta do this. The last thing we called was about 3 weeks ago, and you demanded that we had to have a hydrogeology test. That's $60,000 to $100,000. This was a last minute thing. We shut our doors. We can't afford it.
Well,
Simple as that.
in defense of our regional planning expert who's here, who could probably speak better
Well,
than
him
this.
too, whoever's involved in the county, all you do is bullshitting.
Spread the heat around.
Good evening, folks. Mitch Glazer with Regional Planning. So I just want to build on what Paul was talking about with the 3 conditional use permits for hauled water. So since we're all dealing with this new state law, and we have some uncertainties that are facing us until the state determines whether this is a low priority basin or not, what we've decided to do is to tell all 3 water haulers that we're going to suspend the request for the groundwater study that one of the water haulers was just mentioning until December 6th of 2018. And in addition, we will not take any action on the conditional use permits until the boundary adjustment is resolved. And as Paul indicated, we're expecting that to be August. So we picked December to give a little bit of breathing room in case that process takes longer than possible. So in the meantime, the water haulers can continue operating. We've suspended our request for that study until December 6th of next year.
So we have to operate with no conditional use permit, is what you're saying.
So right now, the water haulers can operate under the terms of their expired conditional use permits. So are there any other questions about the conditional use permits for water haulers?
What about the money we paid for the conditional use permit? You're sitting on our money. We're not going to pay $10,000 each already.
The application's still being processed.
It's for 3 years. It's 2018.
But the price keeps going up on everything.
In 2018, you're going to want
2018 is
another
The
going to be more.
fee that we charge is, we're not asking for
We've already
additional.
done it.
Everybody, please, I would appreciate it if you all be respectful. We all need to work together on this, and I appreciate that. That is, I know how big a deal that is for regional planning to say. So I appreciate that. That's not bad news. If you know me, you know my perspective on regional planning. So, at any rate, I just want, please, let's be respectful and considerate.
What's your name, ma'am, and who do you
Jackie
represent?
Ayer with the Acton Town Council.
And what were you saying, sir?
I represent one of the water haulers. That Lundy was my father-in-law. And we submitted all the necessary requirements. I went line by line by line, and all of that was submitted. And I never heard anything that we hadn't supplied everything that there was a hydrology study done when the original CUP was issued. I gave that. That was accepted. Now I'm being told it's no longer being accepted, and so I'm having a hard time believing what you're saying because we seem to be speaking out of 2 sides of our mouths. The fees were paid, the documentation was prepared and sent. And now all of a sudden I hear a month and a half ago, no, it's not enough, we want more. It's not, it's not being told truthfully, I'm afraid.
Well, for the water hauler applicants, feel free to get my card after this meeting, and I'd be happy to set up a meeting with you and the planners that are working on your permit. We can go through it together and try to get on the same page. There's a man back there.
I wanted to know, why are the water haulers the only ones that are being asked to provide this hydrogeologic report, and District 37 isn't, when they're putting water out of the same basin? Why are we utilizing the cost?
Well, as I mentioned, with regard to the study, we've put that request on hold until we figure out what's going to happen with this GSA. With regard to the Waterworks District, when you drill a well, I don't know if there's a similar process. It wouldn't be a conditional use permit because it's not a private development project, but it would be subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, which is something the water hauler CUPs are held to.
And
well, I did speak with the county, and they said that Water District 37 would be included in that along with the water haulers, and that they should be helping with the cost of it. But when I spoke to Water District 37, I was told that that's not the case. So we have two different sides telling different stories. I have it written from the county saying that we should get Water District 37 in on it, and Water District 37 saying not our place. So if we all need to be on the same page, we all need to get on the same page.
Sure, and as I mentioned, feel free, if you're one of the applicants, feel free to get my business card and we can set up a meeting to go through the project in detail.
I want to make sure I understand. So basically, everybody who's the 3 water haulers have submitted their paperwork for God knows how many months. And what you are saying is nothing's going to be approved or issued. Everything is on hold until this committee or board makes a decision, at which point you will then decide what to do with the conditional use permits?
Right, what we need to find out from the state is whether this is a low priority basin and whether we need to proceed with the groundwater sustainability plan or not. That's the decision that we're going to wait for.
What does that have to do with the CUP? Okay, this gentleman here with the gray shirt's next.
Just one question. The revenues generated from the taxes you're going to collect on these meters, is that going to be used to create another empire of state and county high-paid employees? Yes or no?
The answer is no.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. I'll hold you to that.
Are there any questions about the water hauler CUP specifically? Because that's what I can address. Ma'am?
Can you tell us how much the current CUP is for the water haulers, and then the money that you currently are holding? It sounds like for these folks, you just hold that in forever, or so first, how much is the current price on the CUP?
Sure. The current cost for a conditional use permit is about $9,000. If it was filed within a couple of years, it might have been slightly less. With regard to the fees, it's a one-time filing fee. If the applicant wants to withdraw the application, they're entitled to a partial refund before the public hearing. But we understand that the water haulers want to continue operating, and we're trying to facilitate that by holding off on enforcing the expired CUPs and allowing the water haulers to continue operating, and again, waiting for the state response before deciding what to do with the previous request for the groundwater study. So that's where we're at right now.
So you're saying that the fee was a one-time fee?
That's correct.
Because my husband paid a fee, and then after he died, I was continuing on because I got a letter from you saying that it hadn't been completed. So then I had to pay another fee, and I just contacted the county again, wondering where we're at on our CUP, and then they told me that I'm probably gonna have to pay another fee as of March 8, 2018. So do I get a refund on my last one since my husband already paid it?
I'll give you my business card, and we
I would
can need
love
to
your
go
business
through the details of your case. I don't have it right there. But we'll get your questions in.
Every time you call them, it's another fee. A person just paid $10,000 flat.
Like I said, we'll go through the details of your case.
Do you have how many cars did you bring with you?
I brought so any other questions specifically about the water hauler CUP?
Are the water haulers still going to be required to give the expensive hydrology reports if we're considered low priority?
We don't know. That's why we're going to wait until December 6th of 2018.
It should be no.
So we'll find out.
Why do we have to do that?
The answer should be no.
So let's say that we are considered low priority and you guys can just dismiss yourselves and everything. And so you're going to say you're going to allow the CUPs to go through?
A conditional use permit requires a public hearing, so I can't guarantee that it'll be.
What would stop it from going through if everything's considered low and we can go ahead and go on with our business?
I don't want to get into the details of the case. We would need to complete the analysis through the California Environmental Quality Act and have a public hearing. So it's up to our Regional Planning Commission, and I can't speak for what decision they make.
But you're on the regional planning?
No, I'm not on the Regional Planning Commission. The Regional Planning Commission are 5 members that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors that make decisions on conditional use permits, and then their decisions can be appealed to the Board of Supervisors.
Do you have their names?
Can you tell us?
I can send it to you. If you want to get my card, I can email it to you.
Can you rattle them off?
No, I can't rattle all 5 names. Under a lot of pressure.
You can't remember
Hi, Mitch. I'm curious as to what are we going to do with these haulers without their CUP? So now you want them to wait until the state makes a decision. You've extended their expired CUPs till December 6th of 2018. if in fact then you do issue their CUPs at that time, what's their time frame going to be? Is it a 10-year CUP, a 15-year, a 20-year? Because they all have time extend, yeah.
That's a good question, Pam. Typically, it's 15 years, but we can grant more under certain circumstances, so we could definitely look at that, and if we feel that a longer term is justified, we could recommend.
We asked for 20 years, you gave us 5. We each got 5.
I can't guarantee what decision the Regional Planning Commission's going to make.
But you don't seem to help the problem. You should be helping them to make their decisions.
That's the problem, is that we all know there's term limits on the CUPs. I've applied for CUPs myself. So it's questionable why they would not be given something more than 5 years. They're in business, and they can't be having these horrendous expenses every 5 years to pop up.
And the residents are worried.
And then the fees are passed on. You know, it's a never-ending cycle of money.
I think it's a fair point, so when these come to public hearing, I think we need to look at the grant term. I'm hearing that that's.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question, but it's not CUP related, so I'll wait till.
Anything else on the CUP?
So say a year from now and you do grant CUPs to all our water haulers, but say we still need a hydrogeological assessment. At that time, would Waterworks 37 be open to going in on the assessment together to help pay for it, seeing as they pump at the math that you gave? I forget how many acre feet per year, but I added up on my phone. It was about 325 million gallons of water, which is way more than we pump individually and even all together. So when we have to pay for this assessment, would you be willing to help us pay for it, seeing as you pump just as much, if actually more water than we do?
I think it's something that we're going to discuss after the state decides whether it's a low priority basin. I think part of the thought process is that if the state says we need to do a groundwater sustainability plan and hire a consultant, as Paul mentioned, then some of this work might be done as part of that plan. So there's many different scenarios that could happen.
Many different scenarios.
Since water haulers are the lifeline to our community,
Yes.
I just wonder how many water haulers are here today?
All
So the question is, how many do we serve? How many residents do we serve in this area through water hauling?
Good questions. Those are all part of what's required to provide to the Department of Regional Planning as part of the CUP application process.
I'm also hearing that some of these water haulers, after hearing some of this information that we've been sharing tonight, are actually thinking about closing the doors. If that happens,
District 37 will pick up that. They'll run the pipe to you.
They haven't done the process, right? They charge you for the pipe. It's not paying $100,000, not the water company.
Conversation 10 years ago. $20,000 a foot from the main street?
Well, I just want to make. Please do.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, so I apologize. I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but that's a perfect question. I represent a parcel of 2.5 acres that's about 440 feet away from main hookup with the county water. And the people wanted to know if they could drill a well. Well, it's in a bad water area because they want to develop their land. So it's in a bad water area. Witchers and well guys are saying you may not get 3 gallons a minute. So the people can't develop their land because they can no longer build with hauled water. Can't do that anymore. Whoever said that before, I've been taken down by the state. So in order to put in this pipeline, the county, the engineers are quoting over $55,000 to bring the water 440 feet. Plus they have to add another 100 feet past their property line. So you guys are putting us all out of business. Our contractors have gone away. We can't sell land anymore. The value of our property is gone. We're slipping 1 sentences into state Senate bills that are affecting our lives. We're going to go back home to wherever you go and you're going to turn on the faucet and there's going to be water there. We don't live like that. So I want to represent the people. I want to sell the land. I want to build houses. So how do we do that? These folks here have been hauling our water for years. And you've taken it all away from us. Don't know what to do anymore. We're at our wits' end. We need help over here. So until all these people realize that their land value is worth zero right now because they can't build on it, then you guys are really going to have trouble on your hand. And I understand that the supervisor's office is here as well. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it, Leona. You need to bring this back to our supervisors. We need to build here. This is not helping us.
Ma'am in blue shirt?
Yes. Are you aware of how important the water haulers are to the communities of Acton and Agua Dulce? They're the reason we're still living here. Because without them, we have no water. Our well went dry 15 years ago. We would have been long gone. And I don't understand why you even consider penalizing them. They are the blood of these communities. You know, there's an old saying. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Stay out of our town and out of our water.
The bottom line here is LA County wants to control the water.
Yeah, it's all about money. Money.
Thank you.
And control.
Sir?
Leave us alone. Leave us alone.
Okay. So, the general assumption here is every person that's on a well, if they use more than X amount, is going to have to be taxed on certain things. Yes, obviously. So, essentially, they're going to be paying for their meters. They're going to be taxed on water they already have a right to that is being taken by the state. And then other taxes are obviously going to be imposed. What are you giving back to this community? Those taxes, well, just hear me out. Those taxes, it's a dilemma. Financially, this is going to be straining on an entire community. Finances are going to go out to pay for these things. Obviously, if the water haulers go out of business, this community is screwed. So those taxes are leaving this community. It's not funding anything in this community. Money can't go to the water haulers because they can't bring water in because they're also being taxed. So then there's another fee imposed if they're hauling water to anyone. So what kind of stipulations, what kind of safeguards could be implemented to make sure this community doesn't go under because of this?
Your first point about where does the money go? The money, if it does happen to have to be collected to fund the groundwater sustainability plan for the region, it will stay in the region. There's no money that would be going to the state.
But the dilemma there, obviously there is a dilemma there. Pretty much all taxes are put into a general fund. Obviously, we've seen with the gas tax that just passed in California.
Yeah.
I work in politics. I'm actually an intern in politics. I know where that gas tax goes. None of it, about 5% actually goes to our roads. The rest is put into a general fund. So, assuming that that's where the gas tax, that had stipulations to make sure our roads are good. This doesn't have any stipulations besides to protect water, but that's a general assumption. Where exactly would that money go? Is there anything that can safeguard a community in the event that we are deemed high priority, the water haulers leave, and everybody's being taxed?
The funding would be entirely under local control.
So that's fair enough. Let's say it is under local control. Who would be the local authority controlling this? Would it be the town of Acton, town of Agua Dulce? Would it be the county? Because obviously we've seen the way the county spends a lot of money. Not really all that.
The funding would be under the control. Is this thing still working? Apparently the batteries only last a certain amount of time, but I'm happy to talk louder. The funding would be under local control. Now, is there...
What do you mean by local control?
Local control would be under the control of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency.
That agency would be under the county, but as an unincorporated area of the county, how do they govern this area? That's the big dilemma, because we are unincorporated. We're LA County, but we're unincorporated LA County. So how can a LA County agency
come with, obviously, an act that governs LA County as well as unincorporated areas, and how are they going to differentiate between the two?
Well, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the East Acton Basin is in this defined region only.
What if they were shut down today? How would they get water?
I'm sorry, I want to be sure I address this man's question. Sir, you seem like you had a follow-up question.
Well,
Please go ahead.
at the end of the day, what I'm asking is, who is the local agency? You're saying it's the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, but who is that? Who
That is
controls that?
myself and Mitch Glazer.
Well, what entity are you part of? Are you part of LA County? Are you part of the town of Acton? What? Like, how are you connected to either the government, LA County? How is that connected?
Well, I'm principal engineer over District 37, and Mitch, of course, represents
Who is your
the
boss?
Los Angeles
LA County.
And Mitch represents the Department of Regional Planning as a land use planning agency for this region.
Beautiful. So, since both of you guys do that, what safeguards could be added to protect our community? It's the essential gist of what I'm asking.
We were requested by Supervisor Barger to do the best that we can to advocate for your community and provide the help that you folks need to meet what's required under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We didn't bring about the SGMA. We're here to do what we can to ensure that the local water haulers can stay in business, to ensure that folks that are pumping can continue to do so. The purpose of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is to ensure that basins aren't overdrafted. As I mentioned before, this is primarily focused on other basins in California that are under much distress.
Sir, are you going to use any of the funds to create projects that help with recharging groundwater then?
That's the question I think a lot of people want to.
There's a possibility that that could be the case in the future. Again, we're talking quite some time in the future.
You said the taxes go back to GSA, right? The taxes that you would collect from this?
Well, any fees that were collected from
Would go
pumpers,
to
yes,
you.
they would be managed by the GSA.
And so how will that money be spent? You said that if you control that money, right?
Initially, only enough would be collected to finance the cost of a groundwater sustainability plan for this region. No more.
Is Supervisor Barger the one driving this program?
Absolutely not. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was signed into law by our governor.
Oh, yeah, that fixes it. Hold on.
Quiet, woman has the floor.
Being a water hauler, if this goes into effect where we're regulated, will we be regulated monthly, yearly? How will we be regulated? And if we hit our limit for the amount that we can use during that period of time, how much will we be fined or taxed or whatever on it? And then if we decide, okay, we're not going to do that, then what do I tell my customers when they call me empty? Hey, I don't have any water for my horses, my family. How do we not get, well, I guess first, how will we be regulated? Monthly, yearly, how will that be?
Well, first of all, since water is so seasonal in its use, it would be on a monthly basis.
Okay, so when I hit my monthly quota of what you feel that I'm allowed to haul to my customers who need water for drinking, for their livestock, just for their personal, everyday livelihoods, you know, to shower, to have clean, potable drinking water. I hit that limit and they call me and say, I'm empty, I have no drinking water, I can't flush my toilets, I can't shower, I can't drink, I can't do any of that. What am I supposed to tell my customers?
It's probably very premature at this point.
It's really not though, because this is going to affect thousands of lives. This is not premature.
But in terms of the exact detail on how the groundwater basin will be managed, it is.
But we need to know that so that we can prepare for it.
We have no idea projecting what those costs might be at this time.
So you're going to have a lot of empty lots.
Let's say,
But that's what they want,
But
and say-
say-
that way they got the water, LA.
so there is going to be a fee, which in turn I'm going to have to say to my customer, you know what, the only way I can deliver to you is if I add X, Y, and Z to your bill, or you don't get drinking water. How is that right? How is that even logical to you guys that we have to tax somebody more to give them drinking water? You need it. It is a necessity to live.
I agree with your points. We are charged with implementing the state law.
It shouldn't be a law, though. How is that a law to deprive somebody from drinking water?
You can't do that. You can't tell people you can't have drinking water.
That is going to be a huge lawsuit for you guys. Huge lawsuit. Telling somebody they cannot have drinking water. And if for you to tell us that we cannot take a certain amount of water to somebody who needs drinking water, that is not okay. It is not a privilege to have clean water. We are allowed to have clean water. We provide it.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Not under sustainability.
Yeah.
I know that it was brought up that AVAC would eventually try, at some point you would probably have to provide water to the basin if the water always go out of business. And they talked about the cost per foot to pipe it into private homes. We live in the hills off of an easement. The road Hubbard from Escondido Canyon to us is over a mile long. It's probably another quarter of a mile up a private road to our home. Who's going to pay for the piping on those easements to get to us?
You are.
We don't live off of a public road, okay? We're not right off of, a main paved highway. It's going to have to go at least a mile and a half to our house, and then we have to pay for it from the easement to our house. Who's going to pay for that?
You are.
We are.
Again, we have no intention whatsoever of asking the water haulers to discontinue service to those homes that need it.
This is where your head is. This is where your head is.
I don't believe that's the case, ma'am, to be honest with you.
It is.
Sir in the back with a blue t-shirt.
Yes, but anyway, a lot of the people around here have horses. Horses drink an awful lot of water. There's a lot of people like myself who are senior citizens on a fixed income, and we're going to be taxed again, now the gasoline, now we're going to be taxed on water. Well, it's beginning to become too expensive for a senior citizen to live here in California because, if you start a tax every now and then, it's going to go higher and higher, and it's not fair for our community, and we really, all we want to be is just left alone by you guys.
Well, you voted the wrong people in office, and that's what you're getting.
I'm sorry, we need to go after the gubernatorial people that are coming.
I'm sorry, can we have quiet on this floor? Ma'am, please go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry, I might be a question. Could I ask for quiet? Ma'am, go ahead.
How are you going to determine what the water haulers can actually, because I live on hauled water. So I lived 4 days without water. I know what it's like. So to take that right away, I'm going to tell you, all these people, there'll be an uprising. But secondly, how are you going to determine what the water haulers can haul and what it's going to cost?
What's typically done, or has been done, in other situations where a basin has become adjudicated, for instance. If you looked at the Antelope Valley Groundwater Basin, just went through a 10-year process to adjudicate the basin. What ends up happening is that the court looks at what are people currently pumping and tries to ensure that they're able to continue pumping at a similar rate. Or in the event that there's less groundwater because of a severe drought, that everybody is reduced proportionally. So everybody suffers across the board equally.
Everybody suffers, that's right.
Well, in the event, I have to tell you folks tonight, the situation with the groundwater here in Acton, there are lots of issues with the groundwater here. I don't know how many of you folks are encountering issues with nitrates in your water right now. That's a significant issue. But there are state laws that control the amount of nitrates, of course, in the water. These types of issues could result at some point in the future with a reduced amount of water supply in this region.
You still did not answer my question.
I'm sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
Who is going to determine how much the water haulers can haul and at what cost?
Likely it would be done as part of a groundwater sustainability plan, an allocation of water to those parties that are currently drawing water.
Rationing.
I've heard that a couple of times. Somebody spoke up about rationing. Now, rationing can sometimes be necessary. If the groundwater disappears in this basin, certainly you'd have to go on some type of rationing. I mean, this is just, we hope that that doesn't come to pass.
Hey, you know what? I've been resident for 28 years. I have been conservative for 28 years.
Absolutely.
And I paid $300,000 for my property in 1990. And my neighbor down the street was boarding 15 horses, got a short sale, low property taxes. And now you're going to try to meter my water. I've never had a water problem.
Again, that's not our intent at all, ma'am, is to proceed on that basis. Our intent is indeed to comply with state law and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We will do everything within our power to try to protect this community.
No, you're not.
Hey, Paul, Paul, why don't we take some questions from people in the back that haven't had a chance to speak before instead of, you know, we've got people in the back that want to speak too.
So, who is specifically subject to the jurisdiction of this act? Is it residences within a certain zoning? What is the specific?
Well, first of all, the geographic area depicted in the map is the Acton Groundwater Basin, what we refer to as the East Acton, this purple area. You can also view that on our website to get a better idea whether your property lies and whether it does lie within that basin.
The question was, who does this specifically apply to? So it's a geographical definition?
Well, the geographical definition, and then those pumpers that pump more than 2 acre-feet per year, which is around 650,000 gallons.
Okay, I'm just curious where the jurisdiction is coming from, because this is civil code that was passed by the Senate, and as a First Amendment right, you get to choose your place of domicile. So is this something that's happening because we're claiming to be residents of the county of Los Angeles? Because you're allowed to claim residency wherever you like.
Whether the area is incorporated area or unincorporated area has no bearing on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the state's implementation of it.
The question was, how is this applying to the people here? How are they determining this? Is it where you claim residency? That's going to be something that factors into whether this is...
I'm not sure I understand your question, but if you fall within the boundaries of the basin area, you would be subject to the requirements.
Well, it's comes from the Senate, which is usually entered into a contract to have them govern us. You know, so if you're out of the county, how...
Are you a sovereign citizen?
No, I'm not. No, but our First Amendment rights is we get to claim if we want to be a resident here or not. So if someone was to claim residency
We're all
somewhere
residents
else...
here. Yeah, I claim I'm a resident.
Okay, that's fine, but I'm asking is how does the jurisdiction of this law apply to the people here specifically? You're telling me it's geographical.
Well, I thought that you meant what area, being the jurisdiction impacted, but if you're talking under what jurisdiction under state law, it applies to this region. The state law applies statewide. Ma'am?
I wanted to know if the hydrogeologic report is done and they find that the recharge rate of the water that's being pumped out and the recharge rate is fine and everything. If it shows there is no problem with the water,
The study would conclude whether what's needed in the future to govern. I have a feeling that if it was determined that there's much less water being drawn from this basin than is returned every year, then perhaps nothing would need to be done.
because that is, I mean, from our original, and Bob, can you chime in and help me here if I'm wrong, but from the original CUPs that were done and that I'm aware of, all 3 water haulers are below the pumping rate that we were told that could be pumped out. So I don't really understand why we're being asked to do all this. We're not even hitting that quota.
Well, again, the state recognizes, I believe the state recognizes that this basin is certainly not in an overdraft condition, and will therefore likely describe or designate this basin as a low priority basin and not subject to the requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act at this time.
But that's not determined for a year? You're not going to determine that for a year?
We will submit our application for basin boundary adjustment in accordance with the state window of opportunity in which we can do that. It will be in January, and we'll learn from the state whether they've approved our application again in mid-2018.
Why does that take so long?
The state has The state has a lengthy process. I'm sure that there are many other agencies requesting such adjustments, and that's probably why it takes them that long. Ma'am, ladies before gentlemen, ma'am, and then the gentleman next to you.
I just have one last thought. Then I'm done.
All right.
If you guys are so concerned about the water situation in California, why don't you take the millions and millions of dollars out of that ridiculous high-speed rail?
Billions and billions.
I do not represent the state. I wish I could answer your question.
Take that money and put it into a desalination program, however you say it, and put water into the state of California. That's my last comment.
I think there are many things you do. Sir, next to the woman.
How do I follow that?
Yeah.
I got a basic question, is I guess the governor had the right to go ahead and act this into law, and that's what's basically the fire under your heels is making you do this, but he has the right to enact that into law, but a law can't enact taxes without a vote of the people. So how are you planning on taxing all of us without a vote? It's illegal.
The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act contains provision for such revenue generation.
If you guys call it a fee is generally something we'll pay for a service that we're requesting. We're not requesting your services.
Well, in this case, the fee would only be used to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan for the Acton Basin if it becomes necessary to do that.
But again, it's not a service that we're requesting, so how can you charge us a fee?
I know it's not a service you're requesting, but required under state law now.
Well, you take it on our taxes.
But we didn't vote for the law.
I agree. Let's see, there was a gentleman, yes, this gentleman has a question.
I have a question. On the districts that have already been high impact, and they have meters now.
Please.
And they have meters now, and they're controlled 2 acre. What are they paying per acre foot of water?
I don't know any of those details about what other agencies are doing exactly with their groundwater management and whether they have to pay per acre foot. Generally, in adjudicated areas, you're just held to a certain amount of water to be pumped, and it's generally based on historic pumping. If you used more than that, then you'd be subject to some type of fee, I'm sure. That's the general basis of these types of management activities.
It's a tax.
Let's see. Go ahead.
Because you said it like historic, how we pull it out, but that depends on yearly. We can't say that, oh, just because last year we pulled this much out, that that's what's going to be next year. It completely depends on the weather. There's some years that we are the only water people get because their wells have gone dry. Then they get a good rain or snowfall, and their wells come back up, so we deliver less. So ours is not consistent. So there's really no way to be like, oh, 10 years ago you did this. It's not consistent every year.
But it would be based over a period of time, maybe 10, 15, 20 years even.
But if we don't have a drought for so many years, it's going to be less. We can't say what's going to happen in the next couple of years based on what happened a few years ago, or
Well, it would be
or
an
10
average
years.
over time.
But it changes. So to say, oh, because over the last 10 years it's been this much and you can only get this much now, that doesn't always, it's not going to always equal what we need to help everybody in the community. We make nothing on this water. Half the time we're not even making what it costs to take the water to our customers, and now you're wanting to regulate it to where we have to add even more on top of what it is to even deliver the water. I am pulling out of my savings so that I can deliver water to my customers. They don't even cover my costs to deliver to it. So getting that fee on top of it is ridiculous.
Is there other areas that you cover, or are you doing it just in this area? You and the other gentleman?
Actually, Mitch and I are directors over the Leona Valley region as well as this region, but there's also an effort in Santa Clarita Valley and also Santa Monica. Men in the back?
What's the likelihood that it was not in this whole basin, we're not in a basin?
It's interesting you bring up, and I'll speak very briefly on that. There are many schools of thought that this region is actually an underflow and is actually an underground river. The state control in state law governing rivers, whether they're above ground or underground, are much more stringent than basin. We don't want to go there. I don't mean to make light of it, but it is a very serious issue right now, that if the state were to consider this an underflow, it could have massive and negative effect on the entire region.
Is that the whole concept of waters of America, where they talk about the rivers, what water you have to go there? Is that what that's part of?
Precisely. Typically, those downstream have the most rights. Man in the back?
So, property would have riparian water rights. How would that be affected? How would those properties be affected?
You're talking about surface water?
Yeah.
They wouldn't be affected by
Flow.
this.
It would not be.
No, surface water is not affected by this.
Do you know what surface water is?
Do I know?
What is that?
I have an idea.
Tell me. What is surface water?
Woman in the front, she asked what surface water is. Now,
No, she asked
I'm not
if
an
you knew
expert
what
on.
surface water. She asked if you knew what surface water.
I know.
She knows.
I'm not an expert, but my understanding is she referred to riparian. I assumed she was talking about above ground water and whether there's a riparian habitat perhaps that was affected by it. And that was the context that I was talking about surface water. Okay.
Jackie has a question.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's something we've all been dancing around. In fact, the question just now asked, how do we get out of this completely? It leads to the very first question you were asked. If we reprioritize this basin and it's very low, which is what we all expect, there's no purpose for the GSA. So we could get out of it completely and dissolve the GSA. You're not willing to go there at this point, it sounds like. But that's a fact. All of this concern goes away.
I think you're right.
If you guys would do that or agree to do
So
that.
why don't you do it?
Well, that will likely be what occurs.
That would be great.
That would be wonderful.
Yes, why don't you go back to your desk?
There has to be testing.
We do not know what direction the state is going. Who knows what they will come up with next? Okay, any more questions? Or we can get started with our Sir?
So, I apologize if I missed this, I stepped out for a minute.
Quite all right.
We've spoken a lot about assessing based on the history of people's water usage. Obviously, at least this is an assumption on my part, the vast majority of people in this room and in this community aren't tracking their water usages. So how would you get that history? You said over a course of 10 years. But if that tax goes into effect, it wouldn't be able to monitor 10 years if people haven't reported their usage.
I understand. And so the idea would be likely is that just estimates will have to be prepared. I know it's not a simple task, and that's why a study is not going to be a cheap study.
You said it was voluntary in the beginning.
You said it was voluntary
Please
at
raise
the
your
beginning
hand
of
if you
this
have a
meeting.
question.
Please.
Okay, a woman in the back, or I'm not sure.
My husband and I have lived here for 39 years, and we have depended on the water. If it hadn't been for hauled water, we would have to move. We have 4 boys, they're all perfectly healthy, they're grown men, and that water has not bothered us, and we've depended on it. All these years we live on a mountain, and it's hard for them to come up, but they do, and they have never failed us. We need the water, or we will have to move out of here.
And can't ride.
Understood, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Let's get started. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is not the end of the meeting. I want to just...
My camera died at the end.
We took initial comments from the group, and we'd like to proceed with our formal meeting. And there's several items, I'm not sure if you folks all are aware of the agenda that we have tonight, but it's pretty much what we've been talking about already. And so just to make it formal, our first action tonight is to look at adopt a resolution for the governance structure and establish a stakeholder advisory committee to the East Acton Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Now, the resolution that we have tonight that talks about that, there's a fairly detailed document that talks about what the bylaws are of our GSA that we formed. They're all available on the internet at the website I mentioned. Fairly easy to get to, and you can all look at that. Pretty much it just states that Mitch and I will be the directors, and that the advisory committee, most of the other items are more of a formality about how we will conduct business, and pretty much by Robert's Rules of Order, etc. The one item of great interest, I know to you folks, though, is the establishment of the advisory committee. And so, again, did we have a sign-in sheet that's going around?
At the
table outside? Okay, hopefully, anyone who's interested in being a part of that advisory committee, please indicate such, and we'll make note of that and be in contact with you. So, our resolution tonight is to affirm the appointment of Mitch Glazer from the County of Los Angeles and affirm the appointment of Paul Maselbas of the Los Angeles County Waterworks District number 37 Acton to become 2 equally weighted voting members of the newly formed East Acton Groundwater Sustainability Agency, approve the appointment of the chairperson of the board, which would be myself, and approve the governance bylaws for East Acton Groundwater Sustainability Agency as prepared in Exhibit A. And so I'll take a motion to approve this resolution or adopt this resolution.
I'll move to approve.
And I'll second that, and we'll open the floor to comments at this time. Sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So APAC joins, you guys represent the county, of course. Will they get to bring 2 people, 2 voting members into the board? Or will they just be 1 person and LA County because they have 2 voting members?
At this time, there would be 1 member from AVIC.
So you guys are stacking the board in your favor.
Yeah.
Right? You're just representing 1 entity, LA County ultimately.
I don't know if I would couch it as such, but right, perhaps that's the case.
Yes, it appears. Anyway, just want to point that out.
Sir, with best.
Must the Board of County Supervisors approve resolutions that are approved in meetings such as this?
So, for example, with all due respect, you're an employee of the County of Los Angeles.
I believe your direct reporting relationship is up through the Board of County Supervisors office. You are making resolutions to establish a board and have authority that will then mandate policy on behalf of the residents of this community. To what extent do our elected officials, to the point somebody made earlier, have involvement with this, and to what extent must they approve actions that you take? And lastly, how often do you report to the Board of County Supervisors? Because that's really where the legislative action that will implement state law comes from. Again, with all due respect to you, I don't believe that you have the authority to really respond to a lot of the questions that you're responding to, because the Board of County Supervisors, including our own, Catherine Barker, can vote completely to the contrary. And as a former elected official, I will vouch for all of that.
Well, the Act does provide certain authorities to the Board of Directors for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and I can assure you that we're proceeding under direction from our county council as well.
Oh. You see that under the direction of, I'm sorry,
Our county council?
Yes. Okay.
Our attorneys? Ma'am?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. We don't really have a choice in who the board members are because the state law says it has to be you guys, and we don't get to elect somebody that we want to choose? Is that
Mitch
correct?
and I have been appointed by our respective
Yeah, you've been
departments.
appointed, but you're asking us to affirm that. So we don't, the bottom line is we don't get a choice on who the board members are.
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure.
Ma'am?
A couple of things. When we spoke on Friday regarding APAC, you had indicated that would be something that the Board of Supervisors would have to approve. So really, the GSA is made of the County of Los Angeles, and it's 1 vote, which is why this town council has asked for AVEC to be part of this, so that there's at least 2 votes, and we have another avenue to go, because we can vote for AVEC. So this town council has asked for AVEC to be on the board for that very reason, and not for selling water or anything else. So I'm a little bit confused, because if you have to go to the board to get approval for a resolution to pursue an MOU for AVEC, then the county is the GSA run by the board. So I'm trying to reconcile those two. It's linked to everything that the prior questions.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Sarah.
Your resolution here, paragraph 7, states that whereas County of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County Waterworks District Acton overlies a portion of the non-adjudicated Antelope Valley Basin number 6-044 for the state of California Department of Water Resources, Bulletin 118. I have a little problem with that because Bulletin 118 from 2003 shows Acton, the basin, East Acton Basin as being separate from Antelope Valley. And the 2016 Bulletin 118 has the exact same figure. So I disagree respectfully with this sentence about Bulletin 118 stating that we're in. It's still not clear to me why the interactive map on the Department of Water Resources website has us as part of Antelope Valley, because their own documents don't support that. So I am concerned about that.
We've noticed such discrepancies as well. We've been in contact with the state. They assure us that these, the Acton and Leona valleys are indeed fringe basins to the Antelope Valley Basin. And that basin boundary adjustment is our course of action we should take this time.
And I'm not disputing that. In fact, I obviously support that quite a bit. But I'm just concerned with this Bulletin 118 because that's not what it says. And I can share this with you. The other concern I had was you have a sentence here, legislative intent of SIGMA is to manage groundwater basins through the actions of local government agencies to the greatest extent feasible. That's not the legislative intent of SIGMA, and I have the printout of legislative intent. To the contrary, SIGMA addresses sustainable management exclusively. The distinction is important because your statement here asserts management authority irrespective of sustainability status, and therefore goes far beyond the legislative intent of SIGMA. Circling back to my comment earlier, if there is no, if we're not high or very high priority, there's no purpose for the GSA in the first place. So I disagree respectfully with what you have asserted here to be the legislative intent of SIGMA, because it doesn't, it refers to management of groundwater basins, period, not, it removes the issue of sustainability from the discussion, and that is the key for us. If we are shown to be already sustainable, then it doesn't apply at all. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand. This language was pretty much taken directly from the state's literature that they disseminated on the topic, and we could provide you a copy of that if you'd like.
You know, I have a copy of from the Act, the legislative intent, so that's why I'm concerned about it. So I'm happy to provide that to you. So.
We'll get that to you. Any other questions, sir?
My family and I have lived here for 40 years in February. We live high on a mountain. We're totally off the power and water grid, but we rely on hauled water over all these years. They've never failed us. Now, if it's against the law, you cannot build unless you're either on a county water pipe or you have your own well. Well, on the mountain, a well today would cost $60,000 or more. We are totally reliant upon hauled water. And, you know, what gives the county the right to usurp our water, which is here? You're not contributing anything, nothing for the maintenance or anything of the water. It's just, now it's becoming close to a legal battle, like a class action suit against the county for this. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Sir?
Am I correct in understanding that you're simply trying to mitigate the state law and do these studies and represent us back to the state in order to help us out with this? I mean, I think a lot of our frustrations with the state and with these three bills that I mentioned earlier, 1168 and 1739, and I forget the other, the assembly bill. You have nothing to do with passing those, of course. The county has nothing to do with that, correct?
That's right.
And I think a lot of frustration that's directed towards you, and you're very gracious to handling it, I believe, is about those bills. Is there any chance, number one, of combating those bills? What venues do we have? I think did no more than we would, how can we
have
combat this?
Assemblyman Tom Lackey represents this region, and Senator Scott Wilk represent this region, and I encourage you to contact their offices.
And they both voted no on this.
I can 100% promise both are guys.
Okay, anybody else?
I mean, it sounds like we're gonna end up being in a low priority basin, doesn't it to you?
Highly likely, highly likely.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye. So the motion, that resolution is therefore adopted. We'll move on to our next item, which is adopt a resolution to pursue a basin boundary modification request with the State Department of Water Resources to reclassify East Acton Groundwater Sustainability Agency's basin boundary coverage as a separate basin rather than being considered part of the high priority Antelope Valley Groundwater Basin 6044. So I'd like to take a motion to adopt this resolution.
I'll move to adopt.
And second that, and we'll open the floor to any comments.
I'll second that one.
You like that?
This is a formality that we're going through, and much of what we've already talked about, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
I support this motion.
Excellent.
I just have one question about the formality. Since there are only 2 board members, what happens when you guys disagree? I know it's probably in your bylaws, but could you fill us in on
We
that?
believe it's highly unlikely we will disagree.
That's not the most reassuring thing.
I hear what you're saying, but I want to assure you again, we're here to represent your community and to help the community. We're not here for this for our own benefit by any means. District 37 provides water to many residents in this region. Our intent is to continue to do so. We're here solely to do that. We're here to provide water to the community. We don't really have any ulterior motive at all. Ma'am?
I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to suggest to whoever is determining for high or low that you suggest that we're determining as well. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Yes,
the question?
low priority.
You're going to take it back to whoever you have to deliver the message that we all want you to determine us as low, and you're going to encourage them to determine us as low priority.
Well, in fact, we will ask for a basin boundary adjustment. It's solely the state's discretion to determine whether it's low priority, but we've already made it very clear to them that that is our understanding and intent, that it be described and designated as such. Any other questions or comments on that item? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Resolution is adopted.
Aye.
And our next item that we have this evening is to adopt a resolution to coordinate and pursue Proposition 1 grant funding for potential groundwater sustainability plan
Is someone
development.
opposed and abstain on this vote, or are you two the only ones that get the vote?
We are the sole board members. Again,
I couldn't hear the
particular item
resolution.
pertains to Proposition 1 grant funding for the development of, potential development of a groundwater sustainable plan. Now, I'd like to take a motion to adopt this.
I'll move to adopt.
And I'll second that, and I'll open the floor to any comments or questions regarding this resolution.
Could you read it again?
We don't understand it.
I'm going to, I'll explain it fully to you. Basically, the adoption of the resolution states, and I'll read it verbatim. Here, I'll summarize. Public Works is hereby authorized and directed to prepare the necessary data, conduct investigations, file such application, and execute a grant agreement with the California Department of Water Resources for a grant that would pay 50% of the cost of development of a sustainable groundwater management plan for this region. So I'll explain a little bit, and then you could ask questions, but the state is offering a grant program right now for agencies that need help in developing the plan. We have no intention of preparing a plan. We firmly believe that this will be designated as a low priority basin and there will be no need for a plan. But the window of opportunity to apply for grant funds to pay for the cost of such a study, and in the event we're required to prepare this groundwater sustainability plan, it could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We would be remiss if we did not ask the state for grant funding in the event, or unlikely event, that we are required to prepare this GSP, or groundwater sustainability plan.
And we're responsible for 50% of that, sir?
The state would pay 50% of the cost, and of course the GSA would be responsible for the other 50%.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars? So you collect the other 50% from the people?
It would be, the cost would be most likely spread out about by the proportion of water drafted from the basin. District 37 would certainly pay a large portion of that cost.
Now, how would we be able to decide who's paying what? Is it gonna be a bond on our property taxes, or is it gonna be a bill? How would they designate how much water I'm drawing, or how much? I'm drawing no water, I get it from the company, hauled water, so now that bill is gonna be basically supported by the water haulers, mainly.
It would be those pumpers. There's agricultural pumpers here that pump more than 2 acre-feet per year, as well as the water haulers. But again, District 37 would probably pay the majority share of the cost.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't have a good handle. You know, if we were to have to hire a consultant, these are the kind of questions that the consultant would be charged with answering, making a determination how much water people are using. And there's various ways that they can determine who the large pumpers are, and they'd be in contact with those folks to get a better idea of how much they do in fact pump. And in reality, it's best to be honest how much water that you draw, because in the long run, it may be necessary to support that you continue to receive such amounts. Yes, ma'am?
Maybe I don't understand this, but we're trying to get our boundaries changed, but at the same time we're putting in for a grant. Don't those kind of contradict each other?
Absolutely. Good question, and I tried to explain it, and I'll try again.
Might have misunderstood what you're saying. I'm sorry.
The idea is, in the unlikely event that the state requires us to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan, we would be remiss in,
Well, I understood
if
that.
we did not apply
I
for these
understood
grant
that,
funds.
but how does that look that we're going forward asking for a grant when we're trying, like,
to dissolve? When we don't believe that we fall into that category.
I mean, it seems like.
Well, very good question, and in fact,
I understood. I guess I understood what you
understand your
first
question,
said.
and I'm going to reiterate to the crowd what your question is. The fact that we're applying for this grant, doesn't it make it look like to the state that we want to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan?
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, I did consider this very thoroughly. I spent much time thinking about what the answer to that question is, and came to the conclusion that rather than it appearing to the state that we are intent on preparing a GSP, applying for the grant could even work in our favor, in that the state has limited funding available and lots of needy customers who need it, lots of needy groundwater sustainability agencies who need that funding. If anything, the state will look at it and say, this is a good idea to call them a low priority basin so we can wipe them off of the list of applicants for the grant funds. That was my eventual conclusion as I thought it through. I hope that's helpful.
When do you have to apply for this grant?
We have a window of opportunity. I think it's about November 13th, I think is when we have to submit our application by, so my staff is preparing that application now for this
So it's
region.
timely, it's got to be done.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
How long have you been in your current position?
Goodness, with the county? Several years. I've been with the county, from Fulton for 35 years, working in water just several years now. Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
We have 5 days.
We'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye.
We have 5 days to.
Motion carries.
All against, everybody.
That concludes our business general agenda items. There's one item we have on our agenda tonight, consideration of possible future agenda items, and I'd be happy to take any comments or questions. Mitch, you first, if you had any.
Well, I think we'll come back after we've applied to the state and give an update on that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah, that'd be early next year.
She has a question.
Oh, I have an agenda item.
What did you say?
The resolution to dissolve the GSA.
Yeah,
If the basin boundary modification is approved and the basin is reprioritized to low or very low. Just a suggestion.
I second it.
I second.
All in favor?
We've
All in
heard
favor,
we've heard that request from the community repeatedly since April, and so we're definitely considering that. Sir?
I'd like to have you guys come back to the community when you do the boundary modification plan. We'd like to hear from you what you put in that plan and your justification.
Absolutely.
So we want a robust plan that's likely to succeed. You said it's likely to succeed. We'd like to see that.
What we'd like to do is share it with the advisory committee, and I encourage you to join the advisory committee. We'll share it with that group. I think that's the best forum in which to share. Of course, our draft application will be available on our website as well. Anyone can look at it and make any comments. Okay. We have no closed session items for tonight, so we make a motion to adjourn. If there's any other questions, though.
I move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, the county meeting is adjourned.
Wait, let's call it yet.
We're going to take a 10-minute recess, and we're going to resume the Acton Town Council meeting, and Jackie Ayer would like to lead a conversation relative to the significant ecological area ordinance.
That is going to go before the planning commission in like a week, next week.
So,
And I'll be here during